Hi, I'm Kyle Carlin. This is my ePortfolio for my non-degree endorsement in building level education leadership. I'm going to go ahead and go through my portfolio. I know I only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to kind of go through it pretty quick, trying to hit the highlights. There's a lot of content in here. I just want to make sure I'm able to get through everything. The first thing I want to go over is just my leadership philosophy. I developed this as part of one of the courses in the I think it's the intro to leadership class. Ultimately, my philosophy on leadership is based off of some training I've received and some learning I've received through manager tools and some other organizations. But the main, to boil it down, is basically you need to get the results that you're expected to get. So I'm going into special ed leadership. So those results are ensuring that we're identifying all students that have disabilities and that need special education services, and then making sure that we're making adequate progress with those students. So I need to make sure that in my leadership role that we're getting those results. But then the other side of that is also keeping your people, retention, and making sure that you have quality relationships and that people feel supported. You can push and push and push and get results, but if you keep doing that, you're going to drive people away. And so my ultimate philosophy is built around those two concepts of trying to balance getting the results we need while also recognizing that we have to keep our people, because hiring and replacing people is expensive, it's hard on organizations, and you just lose a lot of overall collective knowledge when you have a lot of turnover. And so we want to make sure that we keep moving in those directions. And within that, it's also by getting to know your people and keeping your people, or getting results and keeping your people. You need to know who those people are. You need to be talking to them about who they are, what are they like, what are their interests. That way you can be putting them in the right position, but you also have a deeper connection with them. You need to make sure that we're comfortable talking about performance. We're never going to get our results if we're not willing to talk about how close we are to them, or what are we doing that's making it more likely that we're going to get the results we want, and what are we doing that's less likely, so that we can start having a open conversation about performance and feedback. And I feel like that's so important. We also have to recognize that an organization is maximized when we're able to develop people into leaders themselves. So what are we doing to coach people up and develop their new skills that they're going to need, either if they're staying in their position of being a more effective person as a teacher or a school psychologist or an occupational therapist, or those that want to go on and be leaders themselves. How do we get them the skills to lead an organization and lead people? But we can't do that if we're not looking at what people want to do and developing those skills for them to get there. Leadership is also essential. We need to be able to push work down and get as much of our work being done at the point of contact that it can. There is stuff that needs to happen as a leader that it isn't necessarily the leader. We as the leaders need to be responsible for it, but we're not always the best person to do that work. And so finding who that is and be able to move them through it. My program of study, I only had to take I had one course, special ed leadership, that was, or special ed for school leaders. I didn't have to take that class. That was waived. I did take school law, supervision and evaluation of personnel, introduction of school administration, education finance, school and community relations, and utilization of technology. I took those courses over the last 9 months, and I really learned a ton through it. Hopefully I'll be able to show more of that as we move forward. The next part is my resume, and it just highlights what I've done. I've been a school psychologist for the last 7 years. Went to Fort Hays for almost all of my schooling. Where I did my practicum, my Army experience, and then different research and publications that I've been a part of, and organizations and awards that I've achieved. So those are all kind of highlighted there in that resume section. The next part is the annotated bibliography. Here I read 10 articles and wrote up summaries. Most of mine I kind of did a wide range of different topics. I've got some in here about digital technology, such as this one on digital technology use in early childhood education, on what are the factors that contribute to that being more effective. Special education teacher burnout. This was one that I found really interesting as we are hiring in my own organization and trying to figure out how are we moving resources around to make things more effective. This was really helpful for me to learn about. Looked at the concept of bullying in schools and how law and policy has changed over time. Talked about family and community relationship. This one was really good to give me a framework of, this one identified 4 main areas or 4 main themes in family and communication partnerships within schools and how that can be most effective. I'll take a lot from that as I move into leadership and working with families and communities, or in the people in my community. Some suggested policy revisions on how to make things more equitable. This was for a proposed grant that would go towards states who are being innovative with their education finance in a way that promotes equity across the state. Let's see what else here. This one was really interesting. It was about how different characteristics within a classroom and within students that might affect how much adults talk in the classroom. With students with autism spectrum disorder, well, in all students, all young students, we know that the more adults are speaking, the better that supports social and communication development. And this study found that there are things like when there are more adults in the classroom, they're less likely to talk. They're also more when students are, what were the other factors here? Sorry. With teacher burnout, when teachers are stressed, they talk less, and so that if we have to keep in mind if teachers are feeling stressed and burnout, then we're going to be having negative impacts on a lot of our students, especially those with autism spectrum. So just some interesting things there. Some of the interpersonal challenges of instructional leadership. So how do we have those conversations with teachers when they're struggling? This was interesting. They did some practicing or some simulations with an actor where principals would focus on had to have a conversation, and then there was scoring on how that conversation went. They found that overall, principals aren't very good at these conversations. They're not very skilled in actually getting to a point where people will change or where they feel like the relationship is still strong. And so I thought some of the skills they talked about here were really helpful, and I'll probably use a lot of that as I have conversations with teachers over the next few years. This one was on teacher effectiveness. Basically looked at several different observation systems or evaluation systems, and basically boiled it down to that there's all these constructs or all these things that are being measured, but really all we're looking at are instructional practices and classroom management practices. And some of the construct or some of the tools being used have all these constructs that really only boil down to these 2, and is there something more that can be done with that? And then meta-analysis of long-term effects of phonemic awareness of different reading interventions. This one was really interesting, found that a lot of the short-term effects don't really last, especially in early childhood and kindergarten students, which just shows that no matter how effective an intervention is, if there's not quality instruction afterwards, you're not going to be making the gains that you want to be. And then ultimately understanding the relationship between beliefs and technology use in education. Basically found that teachers who have more student-centered beliefs use technology more, but technology use can actually change a teacher from teacher-centered to student-centered just in their practice as they find that that's more effective. So that's kind of the annotated bibliography. I tried to do a couple paragraphs of summary and then a paragraph of my own kind of interpretation of each one. Now I'm going to move into my activities. It's all over here in the activity form and log, but I'm just going to show some of the stuff that was on my PowerPoints. So in my district slides, I did have a lot going on with my special ed cooperative at the time, so a lot of the activities are involved with that. Things like school psychologist meetings, to conduct co-op planning. Oftentimes we're focused on policies and procedures of how we were going to best serve kids and how we were going to make sure that we're meeting compliance. District leadership team meetings, I was involved with a lot with the KISA implementation last year, so I summarized that there. I was also part of co-op planning meetings where I had me and the director of the co-op, as well as a couple other people, would meet and talk about direction. What did we want to be doing as a co-op, policies, procedures, etc. I was a part of community mental health conversations with with people like Josh Tangway, who's in our community. He's a therapist here, as well as with Ian Liker, who's with NAMI of Kansas. Those connections have actually led to greater involvement between mental health in the schools, and I'm really excited for where that's going. And then, as part of the ethics and integrity, I developed an IEP system handbook, which will help the compliance of our IEPs as a cooperative. This lists 9 hours, but I spent a lot more time than that working on creating this. It's about 250 pages of guidance on how to use our IEP system and then how to write quality IEPs. The next section is elementary. Because I was planning on becoming an elementary principal, I did focus mostly here. I did do 12 of my activities as elementary. This includes things like being a part of our trauma-sensitive schools committee. We as a co-op were moving towards trauma-sensitive approaches. Even one of our schools, Wilson Elementary, is using a large number of trauma initiatives, and so this committee helped shape some of that. The committee continues going to this day. I was involved with professional development planning for the summer. I provided some training on positive behavior supports, but there was a process over the school year that involved the planning and development of that menu of trainings and everything else. I was also a part of Westside Elementary planning meetings. That's where we would focus once a week on each student and talk about their services and what all they were doing, how we could be making adjustments to make sure that our teaching was being effective for them. At La Crosse Elementary, where I was a school psych before, I worked with their principal and teachers to implement MTSS processes that we looked at everything from resource mapping all the way to how intervention development, progress monitoring, and all of that stuff, and making it really a system that worked together, not just a single entity. As a part of PBIS meetings, CHAMPS training, parent-teacher conferences, all of those things were there as well. I did supervise a social work service student last year and helped get things set up for her. Created a FERPA video and conducted IEP meetings in the ethics area. As far as secondary, kind of a lot of the same types of things. I did attend an SEL growth training that where we were really focusing on our secondary. Did some dynamic learning maps training, some more trauma-informed planning. I kind of broke a couple meetings up because we were looking at it K-12. That social work intern, she did a lot of her work under me at the secondary schools as well. And then IEP meetings in this level, and then a psychologist department meeting. We were involved with planning K-12. The last section is my reflection. And here I just kind of talk about how the training, or how the program changed me. I definitely changed my perspective in how I looked at my role in IEP meetings, my role in conversations with teachers, and over time I actually developed my own kind of decision-making process, because I recognized I needed to be able to have a way that I was getting to a consistent answer every time, make sure I was thinking about those things that are most important. And so this little framework here is what I kind of put together, and I use that as my decision-making matrix. Incorporates, what are the key things we need to know about decision-making, the goals of my organization, my own personal goals, which are highlighted here, but then also taking into account the Eisenhower matrix of is it important, is it urgent, in making a decision. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to sharing this in more detail in the live session. Thank you.